Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back. I am here with yet another day of 31 Days of Tarot 2020, hosted by Ethany. I will leave, of course, all of the tags below so that you can find all of the participating channels, though I'm sure at this point, given that we're at day 29, that you've figured all of this out by now, and are following along. So day 29's prompt is to talk about underrated decks. And the prompt was 5 underrated tarot decks, but I've chosen to just go with 3 tarot decks and an oracle, because they're ones in my collection that kind of stuck out for this prompt. And it's a bit hard, I think, to say that a deck is underrated, right? Because when you say something's underrated, it's almost like saying, people don't like this enough, or people don't like it, but I think they should like it. And I don't think that people dislike the decks I'm going to show. I don't think that they're underrated in that sense, not at all, and I love all of these decks, but I do think that these decks stand out to me as ones that I don't really see all that often on Instagram or YouTube, for example. I just don't see them mentioned as frequently, and so that's what I mean when I say that these decks are underrated. Not at all that I think that people don't like them, because I don't think that's true. So the first deck I wanted to show, I've shown before, and this is the first indie deck I ever bought, the Heart and Hands Tarot by Blackbird, and this is my trimmed copy that we know from #TarotDisaster got water damaged, and this is a really cool deck. It's black and white line art. Check out the backs. And this is just one I don't see around all that often, and I think that it's a really neat deck. I like the artwork style a lot. I like the people in this deck. Eight is justice and 11 strength in this deck. It's a deck that reads well for me. It's one that as soon as I saw it, I liked it and knew that I wanted to work with it, and I'm still very drawn to this deck. And I will say, all of these, I will mention that I deliberately did choose for this prompt as well, that all of these decks at the time that I'm filming anyway, are decks that are available, or decks that are in print. I wasn't going to make a video where I'm like, you know what decks people don't talk about very often? These decks that are impossible to find. So there were a couple decks in my collection where I was like, oh, that one, you don't see a lot of people talk about that. But then it clicked in my mind like, oh, well, that's because that deck is way out of print or something, right? So I picked decks that are all available. So if any of these decks, are underrated in the way that I mean, that I don't see them around a lot, and you're just seeing them for the first time or thinking, wow, like that's a neat deck that I didn't know about, they are decks that you should be able to find. And so I got this deck on Etsy, and to best of my knowledge, it's still there. So that's the Heart and Hands Tarot. I love this Three of Wands. I really, really love this Three of Wands very much. It's hard to capture all of the intricate detail of the artwork style for this deck. But it's a really cool deck. I love working with it. When I damaged it, I was devastated, and there was absolutely no question that I was hopping online and immediately getting another copy. I couldn't imagine not having this deck in my collection. So that's the Heart and Hands Tarot by Blackbird. The second deck I want to mention is actually a US Games deck, so very widely available in print. And that's the Dreaming Way Tarot by Choi with art by Kwon, Shina. And there's a Dreaming Way Lenormand as well. And I believe the first place that I ever saw this deck was on Little Red Tarot, Beth's blog. And I really liked it when I saw it. It has these green backs. I wasn't sure at first if this deck might be a bit too whimsical for me. Whimsical is how I would describe this deck, and it's definitely not a word I would use to describe myself or even my artistic preferences. in terms of style, but I love the faces in this deck. I love how it feels textured. I love the prints on the clothing in this deck and the colors. I love how full of polka dots this deck is. You don't get enough decks with polka dots, do you? And this is one that, I mean, you know, I'm sure people have seen. You know, it's not like rare or anything like that, but I just don't see this deck pop up on the favorites videos all that often, or pop up on my Instagram all that often. And I think that it's a really sweet deck. It reads really nicely. The color palette is beautiful. The cardstock is, you know, it's US Games. If you like the cardstock, I like US Games cardstock for myself. So, you know, it's a good deck to play with that way. It's simultaneously unique and very recognizably Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. Yeah, that's the Dreaming Way Tarot by Choi and Kwon Shina, and I think that deck, you know, could have more online love than I see it get a lot of the time. The third deck I want to mention as an underrated deck is one that I have mentioned before as one of my top 2019 decks, and that's the Tarot of the North Atlantic by Thomson. And so you know that if you've watched my previous videos that I just fell in love with this deck this year. This is the back, and of course it's North Atlantic ecology and environment themed. The medium of the deck is stitching and beading, so you can see the detail in the work of this deck. And this deck, the reason I say that this deck is underrated is because I, despite all of my activity and time on TarotTube here, looking at decks on Instagram, I never heard of this deck. It was a Kickstarter deck, and I didn't back it because I didn't hear about it. I never heard about it until I saw Corvin Green talk about it on their channel earlier this year, and as soon as I saw it, I'm like, Tarot of the North Atlantic, like, where have you been all my life, deck? And I have never bought a deck so quickly. I'd never ever seen this deck. It's a Pippish deck, but just like the amount of work and incredible detail. And you know I love a watery deck. I'm a watery Pisces. And this is a deck that is also interesting to me because a lot of the watery themed decks can, for me, feel really summery, because I think they'll feel beachy, right? And then like beachy feels summery to me just because of where I live. But this deck feels not seasonally specific at all. And that maybe, you know, it's the North Atlantic, right? So there's lots of like ice in this deck as well. I really, really am grateful to Corvin for showing this deck, because I have fallen hard for this deck. And I can't believe that this deck was out there in the world and is available as a print-on-demand deck, and that I had never seen or heard of this deck, the Tarot of the North Atlantic by Thomson. Amazing deck. The final one that I wanted to show is an Oracle deck, and I've shown this deck on my channel as well, and it's just one that I don't see too much on the YouTube or the Instagram, and that's the 100 Ink Animals Oracle deck, created by Jessica Gowling. And this is a black and white deck as well. Maybe black and white decks are underrated. Is that a thing? That's possible. And as the name suggests, it's 100 cards. So it's a nice chunky deck. And this is the back. I really like the back. This deck was a gift from my grandma. And each one has a black and white portrait of an animal with one keyword. And so it does come as well with a guidebook with more information about each animal inside that gives some insight into why, particular keywords were chosen to go with particular animals, which I appreciate. And with there being 100 animals, this deck is quite, I would say, diverse in terms of the geographies that the animals in this deck come from. There are animals really from all over the world. There are animals that I had not heard of in this deck. There are a good balance of like water-dwelling animals and flying animals and ground-dwelling animals in this deck. I like the single keyword. I do sometimes like an animal deck that has no keywords at all. But having a single keyword is good too because it leaves a lot of interpretive room, I think. I did my animals of the year spread, choosing one animal to learn about each month for 2019. So I did the reading in late 2018 with this deck because I got it for Christmas, 2018 Christmas. And the art is just charming in this deck. And because there's so many animals and there's a wide range, you get lots of animals that are not included so often. A lot of the, there are certain animals that I feel like a lot of animal oracle decks will always have. Like there's, very often there's going to be a lion. Very often there's going to be a bear. Very often there's going to be, I don't know, lion and bear come to mind. Wolf, raven, right? Like there's like certain ones that turn up over and over again. But this one has a lot of animals that like I had never even heard of, which is really cool and presents a learning opportunity as well, which I appreciate. So that's the 100 Ink Animals Oracle by Jessica Gowling. So those are the decks that stood out in my collection as ones that I just don't see talked about very often or don't see featured very often on YouTube, at least, on the channels that I'm subscribed to. So if there are any decks that you think, might fit that criteria, meaning of underrated, that I might not have even heard of, let me know in the box below. And I'm keen to see which decks other folks choose for this prompt as well, as always. Thank you so much for tuning in again and watching, and have a great day. And I will see you all back here tomorrow for another day of 31 Days of Tarot 2020. Have a good one. Bye.